Hello, my name is Praveen. I welcome you all to my YouTube channel Java Fun. This is second lecture of the GraphQL series. If you have not checked the first lecture in the series, please have a look. The link is in the description box. Basically, we have explained what exactly is a GraphQL, the history of GraphQL in the first lecture. In the second lecture, we're going to talk about the building blocks of GraphQL. Basically, what exactly is the constituents of a GraphQL schema by which you can create the GraphQL queries and the mutations or the subscriptions of that sort. So without wasting much time, let's dig into it. So basically, as I told you in the first lecture, there are basically two different types in a GraphQL. One is a specification which has been released by Facebook and they are basically controlling it. And second is a runtime, which basically created by the different communities for a different languages for implementation of that particular specification. So in terms of specification, there are four different types, the four different major building blocks of a GraphQL schema. First is a query, mutation, type, and a subscription. So the query is nothing but you can think about it like a SQL query that you hit onto your table, Oracle, Sybase tables, basically to fetch the data. It is kind of a similar thing, but this query is basically for your API or for your resources to fetch the data from the resource. Mutation, as the name suggests, it is basically used to update your resource. Similarly, in the REST world, the way you have a get and the post methods or the post HTTP methods. Similarly, in case of GraphQL, you have the query and the mutation. Type is nothing but the Java object or any object for the language that you are working into that you are returning back as part of your endpoint or as part of your GraphQL query. Think if you are in a Java world, think of it as like some kind of a Java Pojo that you return from your endpoint. So for type, basically the way in Java Pojo you have different data types. Similarly in type you have different data types. So the basic building blocks or the basic data types of GraphQL are something called as scalar data types. So scalar data types is nothing but there is a ID, string, float, and boolean. So last three are basically self-explanatory. The ID is basically a special data type wherein you are basically showing or telling the primary key of your resource or primary key of your type that you're returning. Then you have complex objects. So basically scalar data type using the scalar data type, you create a composite object that is called as a complex object. So we'll go and see the example of it in a due course. And the third thing you have is something called as fragments. Again, for this, we'll see an example. Uh, and the second major part for GraphQL is your runtime. So whenever you create a GraphQL runtime and the query is sent by the browser, that query has to be validated, introspected, and executed. So validation is for checking if the query is valid or not. All the fields specified in the type is there at the server side or not. If the query is perfectly valid, then you execute a query using runtime or you do an introspection basically. So when we go and see the example of it, it will be more clearer. So basically, um, this is an example of your type, or you can think about as a push that you need to return as part of your GraphQL endpoint. So basically, what I've done here is I've created a type called as actor, and the actor basically works in a films. So basically, actor have an actor ID, first name, last name, date of birth, address as its scalar data type. So actor ID is a primary key for your resource. So that is basically your ID has been specified by the ID. Then your first name, last name is a string, date of birth is again a string. So there is no date as a scalar type in case of GraphQL. So date will be represented into its string format. and then you address again a string. And films basically is a complex object because films internally will have its film name, the year in which it is launched, the actors who worked on those films, and all those things. So if we see the response of that particular actor endpoint, you'll see actor ID 123, first name, last name, date of birth, and the address basically. So this is how the you can create a type for a GraphQL and the response that you get. So we will go and check the open sourced GitHub API, which is basically implemented in GraphQL, and you can basically query it using a graphical tool. So we'll check that as part of this lecture. So if you see, the basic difference between the REST based endpoint and the GraphQL based endpoint is, if I want to basically suppose fetch actor information using an actor ID, I'll create one endpoint, say let's say get actor, and then pass an actor ID as a parameter. Then if I want the films in which that actor has been worked on, or using the film ID, I'll say another, I'll fire another endpoint on the films. If I want the actor and the films together, I'll fire the third endpoint. uh, but in case of GraphQL, there will be only one endpoint. So that endpoint will be slash GraphQL, and the query will be changing. So if you just want actor, I'll just send a query for the actors. If I just want the films, I'll just send a query for the films. If I want both actor and the films, I'll basically send the query for both actor and the film. So that is basically a difference when you create an endpoint in REST or you create an endpoint in GraphQL. So let's check an example of it for a GitHub API, and how we can basically fire the queries, or how we can see the types which has been returned by the GraphQL, by the GitHub API. So let's go. We're going doing is we're going to explore the open source API, open source GraphQL API provided by GitHub. So to try it out with the GitHub API, we're going to go to an open online tool called as GraphQL Hub. So if you go to this URL, graphqlhub.com/playground, it will give you a UI interface on which you can try out the different queries and the mutation operations onto your GitHub API. So the first thing that you'll see on this particular page is something called as docs. So docs is nothing but a GraphQL schema which has been sent, which has been open sourced. So if I click on this query, so on the root I see two different types. First is a query, another is a mutation. So in the query, if I click on the query, I can see there are different fields which has been available. So one of those is Giphy API, Twitter API, GitHub API. So all these companies have open sourced their APIs. So today we're going to see the GitHub API. If I click on the GitHub API, I can see there are two main fields, which is a user and a repo. These are the queries which has been provided to us, or which has been open sourced to us by the GitHub. So basically today we will see how we can try it out, these two APIs, and how we can retrieve the data or details from GitHub server itself. So this particular tool will give you auto completion features as well. So it will give you smart suggestions. It will validate your GraphQL query. All those things has been inbuilt, and it is very useful when you're trying to do a GraphQL development. So whenever in the course of this lecture, when we're gonna write our own GraphQL server, we're gonna use a similar tool to validate or query our GraphQL server using this particular tool itself. So if I start and do a control space bar, it will give you a smart QL, it will give you suggestions to you. So basically at this root level, I have these many fields are available. So today we're going to see the GitHub API. So I call GitHub and see it immediately turn red. It means that GitHub itself, by using GitHub field itself, we cannot make a query. So we need to provide some more context to the server basically. So if I do again, so now if I do a control space bar again, it can to show me now there are two different queries which are available, user and a repo. So if I do user, again it will turn red because it will again expect some more fields. So if I do user, and then it tell me that if I make a query or user query to the GitHub API, these are the response fields which has been available to me. So I can retrieve a login ID, company name, avatar URL from the server. Now, after this, one user is still read. So if you hover over it, it can tell me that a user argument expecting a username as an input parameter. So if you see here, it is the same thing. You expect a input parameter or input variable called a string. So it's like a parameter given to your method basically. So you need to tell for which user you are basically retrieving those GitHub APIs details. So if I try to retrieve for my user and or my GitHub account itself, I can do this one and I can hard code my username. Okay, now all the red highlighting has been gone and it's all validated. Now if I make a query now, click on this play button, it will make a query to the server and it will retrieve the result back. So these are the results which are sent back by the server. Now the beauty of GraphQL APIs is I can basically control now how much details I want to fetch from the server. So this time I have fetch login and ID details. Suppose for any other operation I don't need a company and avatar URL detail. I don't need to make any changes onto the server side. I just remove those fields from the query and make a call again. Now this time I should just receive two details. So this is how GraphQL is very beneficial for controlling the amount of data that you're sending between the client and the server. So it basically your API has become more performant because you're not sending unnecessary amount of data over the wire. Now the next thing is, what if I want a repo details as well for my GitHub account? Okay. Now in the repos, I can get name, I can get ID, I can get the commits. Okay, let's first take just ID and name. If I make the call again, I'll get the repo details. So these are the repos that I have created: GraphQL, Java programming, Prime, Fibonacci, and Java. And you can get their IDs as well. Now, because there are multiples, you are getting an array back, right? Array or list in terms of JSON terminologies. Now, the next thing is, if I want to see the commits as well. Now the commits has been turned red, and that is because commits internally is again a complex object, because you need to specify again what are the details that you need in commits. Okay, so if I say author and a commit message and a date probably. Okay, author itself again a complex object. Okay, so I get the type name. So this is how basically you can fetch the details from the GraphQL. So if I make a call now, I should see repo details, I can see commit details, I can see the author who did the commit and the message for that particular commit and a date. Every information will be sent back. Now if you think from a Rust terminologies, to fetch these amount of details, you might have been making multiple calls to the server and first fetch the user detail, then repo detail, because potentially in a production environment, these may be lying onto a different services altogether or different functionalities or the different REST endpoints altogether. So either you need to wire all those logic together into your endpoint to fetch all those details and then send it out, or you basically make multiple round trip calls. But this is the thing, it is the beauty of GraphQL, where you can make a single query and for whatever resources are available, you can fetch those details and put it into the same response object and send it back. Okay. Now the next thing that we're going to see is, here we have hard coded a username, but in a production environment we may not be hard coding it, we basically parameterizing it. So how should I send it as a parameter? So whatever parameter that is sent in GraphQL query, it has to start with $sign. So I say my parameter name is username. Immediately all the query turned red because we are not specified or not sending this parameter to the root object. Okay. So here I say username and its type is string. Okay. Now this is fine. Now we need to send this parameter somewhere basically. Now we need to send this parameter somewhere to our query. So basically this will not be here, but it should come from a root itself. So I give a name to my query as query itself, and here I specify it. Okay. Now it has to be a mandatory because you are expecting it, you are using it in your query. Now this is validated, but you need to send this parameter value somewhere, right? That will go from this query variable section. So here again, it will have autocomplete on. It will give you suggestions for which variables that are used in your query, and I see here its value will be this one. Now if I make a call, I should get the same results back again. So this is how you can parameterize your query. Okay, so this is about the query parameters. Now next thing that we're going to see is how we can basically change the response key names basically that is returned back from the server. So what I mean by that is, suppose I'm getting this login field back from the server, but I don't want to use a field as a login into my UI page wherever I am entering this particular data. So I want to call it as, suppose, because this is kind of an email ID, I want to call it as email, but this is not how it has been sent from the server side. So again, if you are going into the REST, you may have to do the changes onto the server side to send it as an email, or you need to massage this data onto the client side to call it as an email. But in case of GraphQL, you just need to give it, if you specify it like this into your query, and this, then if you make a call like that, it will be sent as an email back to you. So this thing is called as an alias in GraphQL. Okay, so this is called an alias. So if ID I don't want in a small case, I want it in a suppose capital case, I can do it again like that, and it will come as a capital case back to me. So this is called as an alias. Now the third thing that we need to see is the repo details that which has been coming to us. I want it to be sent conditionally. What I mean by that is, I want to basically provide some kind of a condition to this query. If this condition is true, send these details. If condition is not true, do not send these details. So turn out you can do that as well. So you don't need to do any if-else kind of a logic on the server side. This is entirely controlled from the client side itself. So this is called as a directive. So there are two directives available, include and skip. You just need to do @ symbol. Now I say include only if certain condition is true. I say if and some variable, right? If I say include repo variable, if include repo variable is coming as true, then only I want to see this repo details. Now it's turned red because we are not sending this anywhere into our query. Again, you need to specify it here, and this has to be a boolean value. And has to be mandatory. Now this has to be sent from our variables section, and if I say first true, and if I make a call now, I should see a repo details coming back from the server. Repo details are coming back, but if I say it as false, I should not see these repo details. See, all the repo details has been omitted from your response. So this is how the client can control the response which has been coming from the server side. Now the next thing is, again, one important feature is, if you want to indent your query properly, you can click on this prettify thing and it will indent your query as well. So that's one thing. Another thing that we need to see basically is, now in these repo details, if I have multiple queries here, suppose, so for one user I'm making this query, and if I want to make another query for another user, another GitHub user, basically if I do like this one more time, see here I say again you can use alias here. Okay, here I say first user. Okay, and here I will basically do, here we'll get variable, here is specify hard code. I don't know the repo details of anyone else, so I'll just put my name twice. Okay, now here if you see this section has been repeated twice. Let's see if this query is working first. Some issue there. Okay, let's run it now. Now if you see, I'm receiving two responses back, the first user and the second user, basically for the same user itself. Now, if I make it true, I'll get the repo details for these two users. Right? And we have two sections, first user section and the second user section, basically. Now, but in the query, if you see, I'm repeating these details multiple times. And this is okay. So if you not notice, this is one more advantage of GraphQL API. Okay, so here I want to retrieve the details of more than one user. I am basically not changing anything onto the backend side. I'm just making a query or putting one more query onto my GraphQL query, and I'm basically receiving the details from the server side itself. Now, suppose you have an endpoint in the REST world where it is expecting a single user ID and it is giving back the data to you. Now, if you want to retrieve a data for multiple users, you may be making more than one calls to the backend server, or you may be creating another endpoint which is expecting a list of SIDs, right? But in GraphQL, you don't need to do any changes onto the server side. By just changing the query, you are receiving the details of two users basically. Now, coming back to our problem, I'm basically repeating these things. There is a way by which in GraphQL you can abstract it out. Basically, you can specify it in a GraphQL terminology. It is called as fragments. So if I copy this thing for now, I create a fragment. I say repo detail fragment name, and this basically we create on the GitHub repo object, right? And if I just copy it here and go back and remove all these things, here I need to specify my fragment name. So how to use the fragment name? You need to put three dots basically, and then the fragment name, right? And if I copy this and put it here as well. Okay, now this is how your query has been shortened now, and you abstracted out the details that basically common in both the queries. Now make a query again, I should receive the same response back, right? All the repo details has been there. So this is how you can use the fragments in the GraphQL query. Okay. Now, what we have seen so far is we have seen what is a query, what are the different types of what are the different types basically you are getting, and in the types, if you go, suppose if I go to GitHub again, say user. Now user, I can see there is a login, ID, company, and data type. If you can see, it's string, integer, string. And this is the string and integer is called a scalar type, which means this cannot be divisible again. So these are the fundamental types of GraphQL. If you see repos is of type GitHub repo. So it is a complex object. Right? Complex objects are internally made up of scalar object themselves. So if you see GitHub repo, internally have ID, name of type string and int. Internally again have more complex object composed inside it. So commits, issues, branches. So commits is of type GitHub commit. See, right? So these are called as complex objects. And in GitHub you have so in GraphQL you have scalar objects like ID. ID is a special object which is used to specify the primary key of your resource or the type. Then you have string, then you have float and boolean. There is no date type into the GraphQL. So date represented in terms of string only. See here. Okay. So we have covered what is query, what are the types, what are the scalar types, what are the composite objects, how to specify the directives, which is this one, include, if, or include or skip. What is aliases? These are the aliases. How to control your response by just providing what are the details that you want. How to compose multiple queries or the multiple resources onto the same query. What are the fragments? So I've covered all the basics of GraphQL API specification. So in the next section, we're going to see when we go to tutorial, we're going to see basically how to use all those concepts to create our own GraphQL API. Now, in the summary, uh, we have seen what are the building blocks of GraphQL. We have seen what is type, what are the scalar objects, what are the data types supported by the GraphQL, string, ID, boolean, float, what are the complex objects, how the complex objects has been created using the scalar objects, what is the query. We have not touched about mutation and the subscription part of it yet. Fragment we have seen, but when we create our own API, we'll be able to modify our resources at that particular point. We'll be touching the mutation and the subscription part of it, but the concept remains the same. The way you create the query, similarly you create a mutation. The only difference is query is just reading the resource information. Mutation is basically updating the resource information. So that brings us to the closure of second lecture in this GraphQL series. Thanks for tuning in, and please do see the next lecture, which is explaining you the difference between the GraphQL and the rest. Thank you so much.